Welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to work on this project. Today I'll be presenting my findings from an analysis of redevelopment possibilities at the Fair Oaks Mall. You hired me to provide an outside perspective on prospects for redeveloping the mall with a mix of uses. I understand the property currently remains solidly profitable, and your objective is to begin thinking about what the property could look like in 10 to 15 years, understanding that adding uses may play out in a series of phases. My task was to assess uses that can be supported on the site and make recommendations regarding the redevelopment program and how those uses can be incorporated. In my analysis, I considered prospects for office, residential, and retail uses at the site, given the existing and projected future market conditions for each of those uses. We'll go into details of the analysis for each of those uses. To support that process, I began by defining the site's market area, and we'll touch on that briefly as well. Finally, based on my findings for each use, I considered how the site might be most effectively redeveloped, consistent with your vision of a mix of uses. Starting with the market area, this can be approximated in several ways. Images on the screen. In the upper left-hand corner, you see a 10-minute drive time area map. Moving clockwise from there is a map of the Fairfax Center submarket. In the bottom right-hand corner is a map of 5 census-designated places that are, overlapping with that Fairfax Center submarket. And then on the bottom left, see West Fairfax County submarket. Each of these areas is a little bit different, but they are broadly overlapping and all track with the intention of being conservative in defining market area. Someday, once it's redeveloped, this property may compete across the entire DC metro region. But at the start of the redevelopment program, I think it's important to kind of keep the market area size pretty small and to focus on competition that takes place at a considerably more local scale. Starting with office product, there's no need to, belabor the point. Local office market is very weak. Vacancy is almost 5 points higher than the DC metro area at the end of 2022. Net absorption in the Fairfax Center submarket leading up to the pandemic was starting to recover from some losses in 2016 and 2017. But as you can see, the pandemic, tilted net absorption back into negative territory, and current projections don't show any meaningful recovery over the next 3 years. And all that is despite the fact that Fairfax Center submarket rents are considerably lower than rents for Class A properties elsewhere in the DC metro area. So, all signs really point to a weak market for office. There's been no new development for 3 years and no reason for this trend to reverse. With all that in mind, new office product should not be part of your initial phase of redevelopment at Fair Oaks Mall. With that said, over time, the market could bounce back, and particularly given that supply in the immediate vicinity of the mall is predominantly Class C property and aging. It's much of it is nearing 40 years old. There could be replacement demand, several years down the line, or maybe demand from users who are looking to, upgrade their space. And so I think it would be prudent, even though it's not the right move in the initial phase, to consider how a small amount of Class A office space could be incorporated into the mix of uses over the longer term. Moving on to residential, first taking a look at demographics. Population, households, and household size are all projected to be flat between 2022 and 2027. So there's not likely to be any new demand coming from population growth or new household formation. But inside that trend, the adult share of the population will increase, and particularly the young adult share of the population, adults under the age of 35, will increase along with household incomes. So uh, those changing demographics, even though the population will be flat, there's a chance that there will need to be a new mix of residential products that cater more to a young adult demographic in order to meet demand that could come from that demographic. Looking at market fundamentals, um, between, during the pandemic, occupancy really fluctuated between 95 and 98%. And, in the early period of the pandemic, occupancy in the Fairfax Center submarket, um, in the West Fairfax County market, um, kept climbing. Even though rents were rising, occupancy kept climbing, presumably as people were, looking for more space in suburban locations and moving out of center cities, or, um, things like that. Um, but then, rents continued to climb through 2022, and occupancy started to come back down, indicating that there's, balance in between supply and demand is returning to a more normal level in this market. But again, overall, even though supply and demand are more imbalanced, there should be opportunity for the right product to capitalize on demographic shifts in terms of meeting the projected demand from younger adults and younger households. Looking a little bit more closely at the supply in the immediate vicinity of the site, much of this residential product is in the form of four-story garden-style apartments with a very similar set of amenities, outdoor patio area, pools, fitness centers, um, things like that. Um, and so the supply in this area is really homogeneous, and it's possible that a new development that looks different, could compete really well with a younger demographic, provided it had the right style and the right amenities that sort of targeted that age group. Um, I would predict that this would be a really good piece to include in your first phase of redevelopment, a residential product that's physically different from what you have in the immediate vicinity of the site, targeted toward that younger demographic. This is a set of properties that would be considered comparable to what a mid-rise, young adult-oriented multifamily style apartment building could look like. You see here, there's a selection of 5 properties from the Fairfax County area. Only one in the site's primary market area, the Julian Fair Lakes. The Moxley is nearby in Fairfax. Um, the Preserve is in Chantilly, and then Faraday Park and the Edmond are both at Reston. Um, So looking at these properties, you'll notice a couple of high vacancy numbers, specifically at the Moxley and the Preserve. Both of these properties delivered in Q1 2023, so they're still in the lease-up phase. That's why you're seeing those high vacancy numbers. Um, Looking across these properties, again, they're all mid-rise, with the exception of the Julian. They all have, between 300 and 400 units. Rents are pretty consistent, and that is noteworthy. One, because it just tells you how competitive this market is, but also because 3 of these properties would probably be considered mixed use. The 2 properties at Reston, the Edmond actually is a vertically mixed use property. Faraday Park, because of its location in Reston, is part of a horizontally mixed area. And then the Julian at Fair Lakes, similarly, Fair Lakes has an abundance of retail and some office as well as the abundant residential. So that property could be considered part of a horizontally mixed-use community. And looking at across this set here, there does not appear to be any kind of a rent premium associated with mixed use versus single use. So that's one key takeaway. Adding residential is going to be a super important part of mixing uses at the Fair Oaks Mall site, but it may not produce a rent premium, at least in the short term, as distinct from you know, any residential property in a single use setting. Moving on to retail, starting with demographics again, no population growth projected in the Fairfax County submarket, but because incomes are projected to rise, we are projected to see a significant increase in retail spending from 2022 through 2027, growth of 12.5%. So that could be a driver of some additional retail demand. With that said, market fundamentals currently are relatively weak for retail. Vacancy is at 5.8%, above historical averages for the area, and also above the DC metro average of 4.8%. And net absorption was negative 199,000 square feet over the last 12 months. So market looks pretty soft. On the supply side, this is a very well served market from a retail standpoint. There is a wealth and diversity of supply in the site's trade area, with the Fair Lakes Shopping Center, which has a wide diversity of shops, including large grocery stores and discount retailers. There's also several community centers, the Costco Plaza Power Center, and the smaller neighborhood center options. That map on the slide in front of you, the green dots are all locations of various retail options around the Fair Oaks Mall site. Did an analysis of supportable square feet at the site based on estimated capture rates and then estimated sales per square foot matched up with projected spending at the site. And my estimate of supportable demand is around 600,000 square feet at the site, which obviously is significantly less than the current 1.7 million square feet of retail that exists at Fair Oaks Mall today. It's worth noting that over time, as retail spending grows in the area, the number of supportable square feet at Fair Oaks Mall will also increase. But the retail footprint will need to shrink relative to what it is today. And this brings us to how to mix uses effectively at the site. So I'm assuming that you're going to create a comprehensive plan for how you'll be integrating uses over time, over that 10 to 15 year redevelopment period that you outlined. At this point, given the weakness in the office and retail markets and the fact that the site will support probably less retail than it has today, I'm going to assume that your phase one of redevelopment is going to focus primarily on adding residential use to the site. So the first question will be, where to put it and how to maximize its value as part of the overall redevelopment plan. So first, element to that is kind of considering vertical versus horizontal. I think people often think of vertical mixing as what mixed use development looks like. Given the wealth of retail that exists on and off the site, don't necessarily need to include retail on the ground floor with your residential development. Adding a residential single-use building to the Fair Oaks Mall site might be the right approach to mixing uses, or at least not adding more retail than just like a ground floor kind of cafe or other small space that might serve the residents of that building. You might still get the benefits of mixing uses without mixing it vertically. Another key factor to consider is how you minimize conflict between the existing retail uses and the new residential uses. So retailers are going to want to keep, highway frontage and visibility from the highways. Residents are not going to want the visual or auditory disruption of a highway. So it's going to be important to keep residential uses away from I-66, out of the way of retailers. Another factor will be parking. Retailers and residents may compete for parking during evenings and weekends and during particularly busy parts of the year, such as holidays. So locating new residential near existing structured parking and away from the busiest parts of the mall will be important. For example, at the northwest corner near the former Lord and Taylor space, probably a lower traffic area than the mall currently, and one that has a structured parking area. That would also, be a good way to keep residential away from I-66 at that northwest corner. Along, sort of the counterpoint to minimizing conflicts and maximizing complementary effects. at its best, new residential use on the site should, add demand and serve as a base of demand for the on-site retail. So making sure there's adequate and appropriate pedestrian access to the mall will be important, and also making sure that, residents feel safe and secure, and like they can access the mall all hours of the day or access retailers adjacent to the mall all hours of the day will be important. So making sure that we think through how pedestrian access will work, and how it will be properly lit, and open, and not create any sort of security issues. And the last piece is really designing for experiences. So one of the goals of mixing uses is achieving near round the clock activity at the site and increasing the intensity of its use. So this requires thinking about how users will experience the site and asking what can residents and retail customers both use and benefit from. So in this first phase, there could be an opportunity to build green space or a public plaza that would give retail customers an outdoor break area, but also provide a gathering space and amenity space for residential tenants to use. And in that way, serve the needs of both and make the site more accessible around the clock for all of these different users, and really draw people there as a destination because it can meet more than one of their needs. Wrapping up, I'll just say there's a high level of uncertainty in commercial real estate right now, certainly regarding office, with hybrid work continuing to keep demand down, but also in retail with the growth of e-commerce putting pressure on traditional retailers. So redeveloping the mall will not happen overnight. And the fact that demand for new office and retail product is weak should not be a concern to your overall plans. Markets change, and in the future, office and retail, there will be opportunities in both of those areas. For the time being, you can safely explore adding residential at the site and starting to diversify uses in anticipation of a much more intense mix of uses that might be market appropriate in the future. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity, and look forward to hopefully continuing to work with you as your plans move forward.